Salutare, prieteni! Suntem alături de Alex de la History Legends, dar înainte de a apăsa butonul play, vreau să vă asigur că inima mea arde pentru voi mai intens decât un tank M1 Abrams pe un câmp din Donbass. Let's go! Go!
My friends, believe me, I want to cover other topics than the Ukraine war. But every time I blink, there are more Russian flags being raised left and right.
Leave me alone!
No!
We're winning! Long story short, 2024 will be rough for our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia. And it's not me saying it. It's the commander of the 3rd Assault Brigade, Azov.
Авдіївка – це, мабуть, лише початок. І
Am spune că Avdiivka este probabil doar începutul și ar trebui să ne pregătim pentru o campanie nouă.
Готуватися, як початок якоїсь такої їхньої нової кампанії. І я думаю, що потрібно готуватися до
Trebuie să ne pregătim la scară largă.
досить великих масштабів.
He's saying this because the eye of Sauron of the Russian army is currently focused on the Donetsk front. And the most problematic for Ukraine right now is Avdiivka. Because let me tell you, they're facing a girthy Russian offensive. Since the city fell, enemy forces have been building up on their latest successes. And now the Russians have achieved a hat-trick with the capture of the settlements of Stepove, Lestochkine, and Smiorc. By the way, that's exactly what we expected last video. The first step could be to clear this Orlivka salient, push the front line a couple kilometers. Now Ukraine is throwing everything they have to hold this line. To avoid this nightmare scenario, the Ukrainian army has sent its elite units like the Azov Brigade, the 47th Mechanized Brigade.
A, vedeți? Nu mai apare cuvântul Azov. Este A și un punctuleț. Deci până și subtitrarea se feciorește când aude așa ceva.
With its brand new M1A1 Abrams. And that's how they would decisively crush the Russians, at least in theory. Remember what the Sun wrote? Heart-stopping footage shows US-made M1 Abrams tank blasting Russians on Ukrainian front line for first time. And now we're even talking about 2 M1A1 Abrams destroyed 300 meters from each other. What a disaster! And according
Și acum nu știu cât de la curent era Alex când a filmat acest clip, dar mai era unul în stare relativ bună, da? Abandonat de ucraineni pe un câmp acolo, da? Și cumva rușii nu-l distrugeau deoarece încercau să pregătească o operațiune de recuperare a acestuia pentru a fi expus ca trofeu pe undeva prin Rusia.
to the latest news, a third one was destroyed. The latest one was ambushed by several Russian ATGM crews. All 3 were hit within a 500-meter radius. This means 10% of all M1A1 Abrams sent to Ukraine straight to the scrapyard within a week.
Saruman will have his prize.
The national interest promised us that Ukraine's M1 Abrams tanks could smash through Russia's defenses. Perhaps that's why when I click on the article, whoops, it's gone. Now further south along this
404 not found, exact ca facultatea lui Bot, da?
Donetsk front line, like firefighters, like devils marching towards the front. Some detachments of the Azov Brigade have been urgently redeployed towards Krasnohorivka to stop the Russian assault in that direction. In that sector, the situation is difficult because the Russians skillfully coordinated and maneuvered their mechanized columns across open terrain right into the town.
Ад. Просто ад.
Meanwhile,
Iadul este iad, a spus acel domn.
the pressure is also increasing in and around Novomikhailivka, as Russian units of the 155th Marine Brigade claim to have stormed the eastern side of the village. And
Cam jumătate din el este la ruși acum.
We'll also have to talk about the disastrous.
Da, voi trebuie să înțelegeți o chestie. Alex nu poate să fie la curent cu știrile din ultimele 5 minute, deoarece el filmează și pe urmă mai există și munca de editare care durează mult în sine și până pachetează el tot clipul, care vedeți că este de o calitate superioară, se mai pot întâmpla multe, da, pe frontul din Ucraina sau unii ar spune din Novorusia.
Outcome of several Russian mechanized assaults, demonstrating the tactical inabilities of a lot of Russian officers. Emotional damage! Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe.
Aceeași rugăminte și de la mine, nu uitați să dați cu pumnul în butonul like și abonați-vă dacă nu sunteți abonați.
As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads.
Ăsta cumva are reclame, dar vă asigur eu că ultimele vreo 3 clipuri făcute de mine, da, urmărind clipurile lui Alex și chibițându-le, au fost toate demonetizate fără milă. Da, așa este.
Make sure to check out my Patreon.
Și aș putea intra în amănunte, absurditatea acestei situații și o să fac doar puțin, doar răzuiesc suprafața. Deci, ce se întâmplă? Tu, când încarci un videoclip, YouTube te pune să faci un fel de autoevaluare și să răspunzi la un fel de text grilă. În principiu conține violențe, evenimente delicate legate de război, da? Și pe urmă ai mai multe subbife, gen conține așa ceva, dar doar în scop educativ, nu afectează emoțional pe nimeni sau există așa ceva, dar cumva scopul este jignitor, dacă pui bifa pe aia te demonetizezi cu mâna ta, ok, pe urmă vine un robot și verifică clipul și îl compară cu ce ai răspuns tu pe acel test grilă. Ok, și dacă robotul ăla, pe măsură ce tu încalci videoclipuri și tot răspunzi corect, vede că merge, la un moment dat capătă încredere în tine și nici măcar nu-ți mai verifică clipurile. Asta nu înseamnă că nu te poți trezi pe nepusă masă cu un gen control inopinant sau așa ceva și suei de la capăt. Te-am prins la clipul ăsta că ne-ai mințit, iar începem verificările automate. Bun. Și eu probabil că am flag-ul pus pe canal, așadar orice clip îl încarc, cât timp nu este despre pește de acvariu, este automat demonetizat de robot. Vede la uniforma militară, zice, aoleu, ceva nu-i bine aici. Și atunci mă demonetizează pe acel clip și eu pot face contestație să vină un reviewer uman să vadă dacă robotul a avut sau nu dreptate. După asta aștepți 2 zile, 3 zile, poate fi și mai mult, deci cam nasol pentru clipurile care sunt urgente din acest punct de vedere, dar uneori te grăbești și le dai chiar așa nemonetizate, așa, și pe urmă review-ul uman vine și în cazul lui Alex le demonetizează și el manual și îți indică pe videoclip, uite, din cauza secvenței dintre minutul cutare și minutul cutare. Și te duci de curiozitate să vezi ce este la minutul cutare și minutul cutare marcat de angajatul YouTube, da? Ca conținând violență. Și vezi că sunt niște soldați care merg cu armele puse în spate pe un drum mlăștinos, nu se trage, nu-i atacă nimeni, pur și simplu o retragere pașnică, violență. Tu poți să faci următoarea chestie. Ok, decupezi doar bucățica aia, poate fi și de o singură secundă, da? Reasamblezi clipul, iar îl încalci, iar dai testul grilă, iar vine robotul, iar te plăzmește, iar ceri verificare manuală, după care review-ul uman vine și spune, ok, ia, fii atent, a dispărut, bine, el nu spune chestia, a dispărut chestia cu ăștia mergând pe un câmp, dar ce să vezi, 2 minute mai încolo ai o secvență cu unul care fumează și ține un discurs cu un separatist rus, o filmare mai veche, de prin 2015 sau ceva de genul, se aude un bubuit, toți din jurul lui fug, numai ăla rămâne și fumează în continuare fără să miște, da, un nerv efectiv, fără să tresară, fără să nimic, avea omul nerv de oțel. Ok, poți să le iar de la capăt. Iar decupezi, iar aștepți 2-3 zile ca să vină să spună, prietene, uite aici, ai secvența cu militarii de la batalionul Azov dându-se jos dintr-un blindat ăsta care transportă trupe și alergând undeva în zare. Violență. Ați priceput? Și te țin așa și până la urmă spui, știi ce, decât să-l dau ciopărțit și monetizat, mai bine îl las naibii nemonetizat, întreg și asta este. Da? Scuzați că m-am întins cu paranteza asta, eu chiar mă gândeam să vă fac un clip separat să vă explic și mai pot fi multe alte explicații și ciudățenii, dar le lăsăm pe altă dată și continuăm să vedem aventura tancurilor M1 Abrams în Ucraina sau Noua Rusie.
PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters.
Și eu mulțumesc tuturor membrilor canalului Noaptea Minții și celor care mă susțin pe Patreon.
21st of February, that was the situation on the Avdiivka front. This is when Ukraine had just lost all its positions inside the urban area, but they still held these villages west of Avdiivka. The Russian army wanted to capitalize on their latest victories, keep the momentum going, and not allow the Ukrainians to form a new defensive line. The battle plan was to penetrate enemy lines, using a devastating and simultaneous three-way pronged attack. The general assault started in the center. On the night of the 21st of February, a Russian mechanized infantry unit crossed this field. In the middle of the darkness, the BMPs disembarked their troops in this tree line. And that's when they got ambushed by Ukrainian artillery. Even worse for this attacking party. The Ukrainians counterattacked and essentially wiped them out, capturing a couple Russian soldiers in the process. Move one, big fail. The next morning, the Ukrainians most likely attempted a counterattack to reclaim Stepovy, but it seems to have been repulsed. We know this because they left behind a precious M1150 assault breacher vehicle. That's a US-made mine-clearing vehicle with the chassis of an Abrams. And this would foreshadow terrible events that would follow a couple days later. As we know, the best defense is offense. So I think that was the battle plan for the Ukrainians. Demonstrate strength to halt the Russians right in their tracks and force them to halt their offensive. On the 23rd of February, the Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade sent an M1A1 Abrams on a combat mission against Stepovy. It was your typical shoot and scoot type of maneuver. In the meantime, Russian artillery batteries shelled all the villages in a 10-kilometer radius from Avdiivka. At the same time, things were brewing at the rear of the Russian army. As an example, here's a pretty rare HD footage of Russian soldiers aboard a Desert Cross 1000 ATV passing by a number of infantrymen. On the 22nd of February, the Russians launched a major attack against Vierne. They crossed 3.2 kilometers in open ground and reached the first houses of the settlement. That was part of the sudden attack. Now it was time to repeat the attack in the center. Now, from a tactical perspective, you see the Russians had already captured part of this tree line, which was only 250 meters away from Lastochkine. That's equivalent to 2 football fields. In preparation for the assault, the Russians proceeded, as usual, wave after wave of FPV drones to clear the village of any vehicles, like this Ukrainian Humvee you can see on screen. And that's when the Siberian stormtroopers of the 35th Guards Mortar Rifle Brigade swarmed Ukrainian positions. And here you can see the dreadful moment. The white-blue-red flag was raised on the village of Lastochkine.
Мы, бойцы 2-го стрелкового батальона 35-й отдельной гвардейской бригады, освободили поселок Ласточкино.
Deci se recomandă cine sunt, din ce brigadă și spun că au eliberat satul al cărui nume nu mă voi risca să-l pronunț. Lastochkina. Hai, că mai ești.
Победа будет за нами.
Și victoria va fi a noastră, spune.
Lastochkine fell into Saruman's grip. The Ukrainian defenders of Svierne were getting overwhelmed from every direction. And that's how they were forced to pull out towards Tonenke. Some of the troops defending these tree lines near Avdiivka were US and Canadian volunteers. And then there occurred a glitch in the matrix. An American foreign volunteer fighting for Russia, raising the colors of the stars and stripes on one of these settlements. Perhaps this was
Așa ciudățenie de clip, nu?
the first US versus US battle of the Ukraine war. The 47th Mechanized Brigade tried its best to prevent the entire front from crumbling by holding the northern flank. That's when, on the 25th of February, an M2 Bradley was hit on the outskirts of Ocheretine. And on the 26th, a second one was hit in the same sector, this time by an FPV drone. And for your information, in the days after that, we saw some of the most brutal fighting for that little settlement. Now Ukrainian forces held a new defensive line with positions codenamed Maria, Irina, Laura, and Francesca. By the 26th of February, Russian troops exploited their breakthrough in Lastochkine and gained another 1.5 kilometers all around the settlement. Some units even reached the border of Orlivka.
Din motive necunoscute a decedat subtitrarea, dar își revine.
Like this infantry squad that was then targeted by cluster munition, while others mopped up the remaining Ukrainian positions in Svierne. In this footage, you can see a drone guiding Russian riflemen in their combing operation of that settlement. In the north,
Operațiunea de pieptănare, ce expresie. Na.
the pressure was
Curățire.
increasing on Berdishi. The Russians had fully secured Stepove, as you can see in this video, of a soldier of the 15th Brigade. And that's when they pushed another kilometer westwards. Fun fact, from November 2020 to February 2022, the 15th Motor Rifle Brigade participated in the peacekeeping mission in Nagorno-Karabakh. According to this video, we see the Ukrainians firing from Berdishi in the direction of Stepove against a Russian motorized unit that was advancing along this road. Now there must have been a problem with Ukrainian electronic warfare assets, because that same M1A1 Abrams from before was now being tracked by Russian drones. And that's when, shortly after, the M1 Abrams,
Ăsta a fost primul.
king of the battlefield, had to lay down his crown. Here's the Russian soldier behind this feat of arms. Call sign Kolovrat,
De poster, băiatul, de poster. Priviți-l.
commander of the Black Hussars Aerial Reconnaissance Platoon of the 15th.
Da? Observăm. Ia să ne uităm mai atent la el. Da? Lopata ruginită, casca găurită. Ok, și aș continua, dar
Separate.
nu vreau să considere YouTube că am și limbaj jignitor pe lângă scenele de violență pe care vi le prezint, desigur, pe televizoraș.
Motor Rifle Brigade. Welcome to 21st century warfare. Here's a video of him explaining how it all happened.
Обнаружили цель, обошли его сзади.
Am găsit ținta, am ocolit-o prin spate, am lovit-o în spate, da? Oprind tancul. Ok.
Ударили в тыльную кормовую часть. Первым бортом остановили танк. Незамедлительно подняли второй борт.
Imediat am ridicat altă dronă, presupun că la asta se referă. Așa. Am zburat-o. It was already smoking. Tancul deja fumega și stătea nemișcat.
Вылетели, он уже дымился, уже стоял на месте. Ударили под башню, и произошло возгорание.
Am lovit tureta și a izbucnit focul de la cutia cu muniție sau compartimentul cu muniție.
Боекомплекты.
On the 27th, new attempt to break out of the Avdiivka coke plant. Essentially, the Russians pushed in open terrain, hoping to get a foothold inside this tree line. In this video, you can see a Russian armored vehicle that eventually explodes, and 5 men are seen running away towards the tree line. those Ukrainian positions were really the last thing holding the Russians from moving on to phase 2. The enemy was already at the gates of Biakdishi, Orlivka, and Tonenke, so the center of gravity of this new Ukrainian line of defense was Semenivka, and in the worst case scenario, that settlement was protected by a couple of small lakes that could bottleneck Russian mechanized columns. So we know what happened next. More FPV drones! Like this one chasing down a BMP Bradley, not Bradley, Bradley. On the
E cu accent ucrainean.
28th of February, the Russians decided to step up their game. That was the front line, and then 24 hours later, Ukrainian strongholds were falling one after the other. I mean, check out all the positions west of Svyerny that were just abandoned. Half the village of Orlivka was also under Russian control.
Da?
It's hard to say.
Cum am spus, să învățăm geografia Ucrainei, urmărind acțiunile armatei ruse.
Whether this was a planned retrograde movement of the Ukrainian army, or if it's more accurate to talk about a route. Berdishi, 3 kilometers to the north, was getting pummeled by Russian MRLS systems. However, the Russians also got glazed pretty bad. In this video, we can see 2 of their BMPs charging towards Berdishi when they just burst into flames because of camouflage TM62 anti-tank mines. And quickly enough, people realized there was an unusual amount of burnt steel in that frame. Here on Twitter, German journalist Julian Röpke wrote that Russians lost 13 armored vehicles west of Stepove. So this axis of attack was definitely costly in terms of equipment for the Russian military. If we look at a map, it's 800 meters of open ground between Stepove and Berdishi. So the local Russian commander thought there's no other way but just to charge, send in the vehicles one after the other. Nonetheless, the next day, advanced elements of the Russian armed forces reached the area of the destroyed M1A1 Abrams.
Okay. Și ori făcut selfie cu el.
Orlivka was now obviously inside the crosshairs. If that settlement fell, it would break the Ukrainian line of communications, and the Russians could break through this new Ukrainian line of defense. By the end of the 29th of February, pro-Russian military bloggers thought that the situation was in the bag. Rybar reported that the Ukrainians had abandoned Berdishi, Orlivka, and Tonenke. However, this report seems to have been very premature, aka fake news. Later that day, you can see Russian
Să-i spunem optimist, dar s-au descurcat reuși.
artillery shell Ukrainian positions in Orlivka, and with the following footage, we can see Russian BMPs pushing along a road. This frame was geolocated here, right at the entry of the village. And in that same video, we also see them bombard this position, so we can believe the Russians carried a simultaneous two-pronged attack. Now it was reported that the Ukrainians concentrated a lot of firepower, all the 155mm artillery, right in that direction, plus all the Ukrainian FPV drones that were harassing Russian infantry units that were taking positions in abandoned trenches. The dream started to collapse with this video from the 3rd of March, showing a Russian patrol right at the center of the settlement, thus confirming their capture of at least half of Orlivka. If the Ukrainian army lost combat position Maria, aka Berdishi, then the situation would become extremely critical. Enemy forces could quickly flank Semenivka from the north. In other words, there would be no more settlements or terrain features to stop the Russians. If this happens, we can expect the Russian armed forces to advance another 6 kilometers west. In my opinion, it's only here that we can expect the Ukrainians to halt the Russian breakthrough.
Vedeți ce salbă de localități este pe aici? Ce densitate au?
There's this set of small lakes, ponds, and even this small river that would make a solid natural line of defense. And of course, this would be bad news for enemy mechanized columns. In that hypothetical scenario, to avoid being stuck, the Russians would focus their attention on step 1, Solovyove and Novomakhmativka, and step 2, Ocheretine. Now to avoid this disaster, the Ukrainians quickly counterattacked in Berdishi on the 1st of March. The drone operators of the 3rd Assault Brigade Azov released multiple drone footage of strikes on isolated groups, making Russian soldiers dance the cha-cha-cha. Alright.
Hal de glumă.
The moment has come. There was this viral video of a Russian BTR-80 pushing inside the village of Berdishi. We can even see the previously destroyed M1A1 Abrams on the left-hand corner. This BTR disembarked an entire squad of 12 riflemen. I mean, look at this crispy HD footage. And
Chiar.
that's when they got ambushed. An M2 Bradley IFV of the 47th Mechanized Brigade showed up and ripped through these guys at point blank. I mean, these guys were camouflaged, but they stood no chance against the Bradley's 25mm chain gun. I could visually confirm 5 to 6 Russian KIAs out of the original 12. And at the end, we see the Ukrainian soldiers counterattack and take hold of the position. So we're starting to see a pattern. The Ukrainians let the Russians advance, and then they counterattack immediately, inflicting heavy losses. Guess what happened the next day? Another BTR pushed towards Berdishi, and once again it was hammered by the M2 Bradley's 25mm gun, causing the defeat of an entire squad. This goes to show Ukraine needs more of these Bradleys. What are you waiting for? With that being said, there are equally brutal losses on the Ukrainian side. We don't have much information, but we know that the large Ukrainian mechanized column attempted to counterattack in order to regain the village of Orlivka when they were allegedly hit by 6 Su-25 attacked aircraft. We can count the destruction of at least 5 armored vehicles, including a German-made Marder IFV. On the 2nd of March, right at this position, DPR troops of the 1st Slaviansk Brigade planted their pole inside Francesca, aka Tunenke. Francesca. Yup, it's hard, but Francesca's gone, boys. She's gone for good.
Dar nu-i nimic. Trăiește în continuare în inimile noastre, dragă de Francesca.
Now, big turnaround. A second M1A1 Abrams was destroyed in Berdishi on March 3rd, not even 300 meters away from the first one. According to Russian sources,
Facem acolo piața Abrams, da? Abrams Square.
the Abrams was hit by an RPG striking the Caterpillar, and then it was finished off by an FPV drone. According to the latest news, Russian assault detachments have made further gains inside Berdishi, and that's exactly where the 3rd US-made Abrams was destroyed. All 3 US-made tanks abandoned within a 500-meter radius. As a reminder, the Battle of Avdiivka
Sau să-i spunem cimitirul M1A1 Abrams.
is only one part of this sequence of operations along the Donetsk front. Since its capture, Marinka has become the center of gravity of multiple Russian attacks in that sector, namely another 3-way playground. One important objective to capture was the farm and hamlet of Pobieda. The danger for Ukraine was that if the Russians captured it, they could slide right into the DMs of Konstantinivka. And of course, Ukraine is very possessive and they don't want that. Using a 3D map.
Dacă și astea mai sunt glume, Ucraina este foarte posesivă și geloasă. Ok.
We can see how much of a cute little village Pobieda used to be. And that was before it became a Marinka 2.0 and it got shelled into oblivion. Here you can see an entire Ukrainian squad exiting from what seems to be a basement. And you can see all the houses around are in ruins. The Russians continuously bombarded the settlement and forced the defenders to abandon their combat positions. That's how, on the 20th of February, the Russians pushed 1.3 kilometers along this road right into the settlement. Here you can see how the Ukrainians deployed the Leopard 2 tank on the southern part of the village. It was positioned in a way to have clear sight on the road, all the while being camouflaged by all the ruins and the surrounding rubble. Mikhail Wittman would be so proud. Eventually, the Leopard 2 was spotted by an enemy drone, and that's when it got targeted and destroyed. As of now, according to Deep State UA, half the village is still in the gray zone. On the 23rd of February, the Russian command turned its Eye of Sauron towards Krasnohorivka. In this one, Russian aviation released an FAB on the Ukrainian stronghold of that town. According to Ukrainian sources, the town was only defended by a battalion of the 81st Air Mobile Brigade. So the next day, the Russians attempted a mechanized assault somewhere north of Krasnohorivka. But just like with my last relationship, nothing substantial came out of it. On the 27th of February, Russians
Alex n-are noroc în dragoste. Ok, trecem mai departe.
stormtroopers advanced over a kilometer towards Krasnohorivka. And we can even believe some detachments made it right into the residential sector. On top of that, there are visually confirmed Ukrainian tank losses in that sector. The defenders of Krasnohorivka were feeling the heat.
Красноголівка, жесть. Русня тисне дуже сильно.
Rusia presează cu putere. Am fost scoși din poziție ieri.
Нас позиції вчора вибили.
So Azov detachments arrived to save the day, namely the 3rd
Asu. Interesant.
Company, 1st Battalion, that just participated in the Avdiivka rescue mission. Now they're back on the front, plus the 1st Company, 2nd Battalion as well. According to them, the Russians got expelled from the residential sector and lost over 100 casualties.
You just need to believe.
If, on the tactical level, a lot of the Russian mechanized assaults near Avdiivka were poorly led, we have this splendid footage of the assault on Krasnohorivka by the 5th Guards Tank Brigade, debunking all the nonsense theories of human wave attacks, meat wave attacks, whatever you want to call them. It started with a preparatory artillery barrage to soften enemy positions. Multiple armored columns pushed forward. They skillfully maneuvered to avoid minefields, all the while being protected by main battle tanks. That's when they disembarked entire squads of fighters right into the residential sector in order to avoid them being exposed to enemy firepower, whereas the neighboring tree lines were later calmed by the second wave of infantry. If the Russian army can repeat such assaults, it's gonna get really bad on the front line. Now, if we analyze on a tactical level the footage we just saw, we learned that a Russian armored column advanced through this field, maneuvering and bypassing around this minefield, after which they broke through the tree line and then rushed towards the residential sector, where they disembarked their squads of riflemen. And the images of the second wave combing the tree line must have happened somewhere here. Like we said before, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians have been expelled from Krasnohorivka. According to pro-Russian sources, they have reached all the way up to this street. Time will tell. In regards to the central thrust of this three-way, Russian assault units have gained another kilometer of land towards the village of Heorivka. This careful retrograde movement of the Ukrainian forces is probably due to their inability to send reinforcements to the contact line due to the continuous enemy bombardments. And let's move to the final chapter, Novo-Mikhailivka. That was the front line on the 10th of February, with a Russian attempt to flank the village from the south. By early March, we see that the Ukrainians counterattacked in the south, but at the same time, they had to give up their positions in Pabieda, like we saw earlier. Then Russian assault detachments have also managed to anchor themselves in the eastern part of Novo-Mikhailivka, which they celebrated by planting this flag. Let's backtrack a bit to the 13th of February. The Russians had made gains east of the village prior to launching the general assault. You have to know that the Russian aviation completely fabbed the entire village. And any
Da? Când auziți FAB, înseamnă că au bombardat cu bombe FAB. 500, 1500, ce aveau și ei la dispoziție.
possible stronghold was reduced with massive 500 kilogram bombs.
500.
On top of that, to soften Ukrainian positions and to allow a smooth entry of mechanized columns, the Russians also managed to destroy 2 Ukrainian tanks geolocated here and here. Oh, you thought it was done? Then it was Russian MR-less systems that joined the symphony. The tactical problem remained the same as in the previous weeks. The Russians would have to drive along this straight 1,700 meter long road, fully exposed to Ukrainian firepower. On February 27th, multiple armored vehicles were sent forward, but as you expected, the attack failed. After weeks of continuous assaults, we see a total of 25 burned and abandoned Russian armored vehicles along this road. However, that's not all. 4 BMPs also tried to cut right across this field towards the river where they seem to have been stopped by some kind of minefield. Anyway, we can confidently say that the Ukrainian 79th Air Mobile Brigade is a top G brigade. They're definitely doing a good job at holding the place by themselves. Oh, surprise, surprise! March 1st, the Russians are back. Of course, there will be no Ukrainian drone footage of Russians successfully storming the village. In other words, we don't really know how they did it. All we know is that they celebrated the capture of this farm by planting the white, blue, red flag. Remember, it's the second time that the Russians captured this place, actually. And a couple of days later, there are rumors that the Russians raised another banner, this time right at the center of Novomikhailivka, with Russian attacks in this direction, here, there, here as well, and in this direction. The next logical step would be another push against Vuhledar in order to eliminate this Ukrainian salient. Coincidence? On the 28th of February, there was a heavy Russian rocket attack against Vuhledar. That's all I have for you today.
Da? Ce blocuri erau acolo. Complicată situație. Mulțumesc pentru vizionare și vă aștept pe toți la comentarii.